Welcome to Purpose 360. And today is going to be a fantastic conversation because I am being joined by Thomas Kolster, and he is AKA Mr. Goodvertising. And the two of us, I think combined, have been working in the field of purpose for over, dare I say, 50 years. We don't look that old, but and coming at it sometimes the same way, somewhat different ways, but it's going to be a wonderful conversation. So welcome to the show, Thomas.
You already gave away quite a few of my gray hairs, but that's okay, Carol. 50 years and counting.
Okay, so I love that when you go to Thomas's website, and it's the Goodvertising agency, and then here's the tagline: Catalysts for Positive Change, established in 2010. And I love this, before Goodvertising was even the cool thing to do. So I love to start with, I know there's a backstory about what was happening in the world that got you to really become the counter to advertising. But I want to know, what growing up, what was the influence from your parents or your childhood that created at least the fertile territory for you ultimately to lean in this direction?
It's such a good question. I think it's something I only realized much later in my life, that might have been the sort of fertile ground for where I ended up. And one of the moments where I got to reflect was, in fact, that my dad a couple of years ago had a bit of an accident, and I thought that I wouldn't get to be with him much longer, and I wrote him a long letter, and part of that letter was reflecting back on my past. And I grew up on a small island in the middle of the Baltic Sea, called Bornholm, and I grew up with fishermen and farmers, and so in my early school years, what happened was, in fact, that the Baltic Sea, which kind of felt like it was from one day to the next, that there was no more fish. So basically, the whole fishing industry on the island collapsed. The kids who in my class were the cool kids who had water beds with like a little radio built in, and might even some of them have had a helicopter, which was, fantasy land for me, just had to move out from the next day to, the banks collapsed, etc. So I think that was my sort of first environmental wake-up call, which I didn't really think about at all when I wrote Goodvertising. It's not mentioned. And then I think the other influence why I mentioned my dad was that my dad was in politics.
Oh, okay.
And so we, at our home, television wasn't allowed. We would sit around the dinner table and we would talk. And so, yeah, so just as an adult looking back at that, I think that was actually quite foundational. And plus, my parents' reaction when I, at the age of 21, dropped out of university and got my first job as a copywriter at an ad agency, they were like, hell no. haven't we brought you up with good values, and now you go to this evil capitalist propaganda machine? So I think there's a lot to unpack there already.
Okay, there is. Okay, so there was fertile soil on which to begin this very interesting and different journey. So you've been described as everything from a climate change agent to a pioneer of impact advertising. So when you meet somebody at a conference, so let's just say it's somewhat business conference, they're not maybe marketers, but they're business. How do you describe yourself?
Oh, that's always such a tough one. What do I actually say? I kind of feel like in some ways at work, I still kind of go back to working in sort of the cross section of brands and sustainability. These days, I might want to avoid the word sustainability, and so sometimes might just say that I craft brands that are meaningful or transformative or play a meaningful role in people's lives. So that's sometimes what I do, depending on the context.
I like that description. And I think that, I know that we in the field so fall into jargon.
Yeah.
So I think that meaningful, helping brands to be meaningful is a great descriptor. So let's go to your more current story. So it was 2009, and there was the COP meeting, I believe, in Copenhagen, and you had an epiphany. What was that epiphany?
Yeah, it was strange because I mean, I probably as a Dane, and I probably overvalue the meaning of that summit. It's one of many, right? But I kind of felt there was an optimism at that point. And again, I say that as someone who lived in Copenhagen at the time. I think also at that time it did seem like our elected leaders did care about those types of summits. So they all flew in, the Barack Obamas and Tony Blairs, and Angela Merkel when she was still around. And so when nothing came out of that, obviously I was disappointed and started asking myself those tough questions, which sort of led to me writing the first book. But I think there was also another thing that happened at the very same time, which was that I began seeing advertising from, for example, a car brand, Ford, and their sort of claim on this big billboard, one of the most expensive spots you can buy, sort of like a Times Square in New York, was that they transported their cars by train. And so that just wasn't really a thing I would normally have seen in my work in advertising at that time, where most car advertising would be about how cool the car was, or buy it now and you get extra heat and seat or whatever it might be, right? So
right.
So there was those two things that sort of kind of made me curious and start for myself asking myself the question, maybe there was actually a way forward for me in advertising. I was running a medium-sized agency at the time, traditional agency basically, and so maybe I could actually combine what my parents probably bottle fed me with, a bit more of a value-aligned approach to my trade, my craft. And so that was my wake-up call. And looking back again, being a copywriter and advertising and writing a book is not the most original thing to do. I think copywriters do that. Art directors go DJing,
That's funny.
or do an art book, coffee table art book. And so I wrote a proposal, and then that happened to turn into a book. And I'm still very, very thankful to my commissioning editor at the time, because he bet on a crazy guy writing him from Denmark, and a proposal landing in his inbox in London, and pitching at that time a quite outlandish pitch.
So what came first, the book or the name Goodvertising? I'm just curious about, because that was the title of the book, but was it before? Because you're a copywriter, so which one came first?
No, 100%. The book came first, before the agency was turned around or anything like that. Because to be honest, it was strange that in the book writing process, and that's always why I kind of encourage everybody to write a book.
Oh, we wrote one, and that was so painful.
No, it is.
We wrote ours in 2007 and 8, 9-ish. Because we felt that, okay, purpose branding, that had all been done, but the partners, the not-for-profit partners, which are so crucial for, subject matter expertise and execution. So we did one called Breakthrough Not-for-Profit Branding. But we were so far ahead of the field. The field needed more about what is great purpose branding. So again, going back, was Goodvertising the name? Like, did your publisher say, okay, great book, et cetera, what's the name? Or you said, nope, I have a name, it's Goodvertising, and the book's going to be about deconstructing and then constructing what that means?
Yeah, it was. I think actually that the title I had on the proposal was Bible of Goodvertising.
Oh, a
And
Bible.
then,
Okay.
yeah,
Getting
and then the
religious.
publisher came back to me and
Uh,
said, I like Goodvertising, but I don't
okay.
like the Bible connotation. That kind of, and again, I mean, Danish is my native tongue. And at that time, I wasn't probably as confident with English as I am now. But so, yeah, Goodvertising was actually the first thing in the proposal. And it's.
That's great. So let's just talk a little about the first book. And
Yeah.
because the first book really launched, I believe, your visibility. I know that you've traveled to 70 or 80 countries around the globe. You give thought leadership, you've got clients. So just give our listeners a little bit, and our viewers a little bit of sense of what's in that book, because then there's a second book called The Hero Trap, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, but it's interesting. And I think even, because you actually wrote something before I did on this topic. And I think the interesting thing at that point of time was it was difficult to find literature
Mm,
that could support my book.
your
So
premise. Yeah.
yeah, there was some stuff around nonprofits. So there was quite a lot of that stuff that I read that sort of had more that angle to it. Uh, Jim Stengel,
Oh,
the
Jim's work was
ex-P&G
great.
guy,
Yes,
yeah, it was
it
just
was great.
out,
Yep.
and I really liked that. Um,
And then Good to Great
Obviously,
was also
yeah,
out, so that was really
yeah.
good. Yeah.
So there were a couple of those, but I think Jim's was probably the one that was closest to the world that I lived in at that time, the world of advertising. It was the
Yep.
one that sort of had the language around brands and the world that I understood. So basically, again, remember, I was probably late 20, early 30s when I wrote
Mhm.
it. And so I what I did was I looked at a lot of great work from around the world that I felt was sort of best practice.
Mhm.
And then what I also did, so it was basically a collection of great inspiring work uh, aligned across a couple of chapters that I thought was important when I
Mhm.
analyzed the work, that transparency, being personal, being simple, being purposeful. So sort of sorted around those types of chapters. And then I had some interviews with different actors. So some from nonprofit, some from government,
Mhm.
our climate minister at the time, um, leaders in the advertising world that today, still to this day, are giants like Alex Bogowski, David Droga, who's obviously made an incredible career for himself since I spoke to him
Yeah.
back then. And so yeah, it when people sometimes ask me, I kind of feel like it was a book that was written because I was a little bit angry. I think the opening sentence was, "I hate 99% of advertising."
I love
And
it's so provocative. It's great. It's great.
yeah,
But yeah, yes, I love that.
yeah. So and in some ways it's a case book. It was, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah.
And what year did that publish?
That came out in 2012, but as you know, with books, most of
Mhm.
that work was done in 2010, right?
Yeah.
It's the art, especially publishing back then. It just
Yeah.
was a slower process, to be honest.
Yeah. And then what was the most one or two memorable things? The book launches, you're beginning to ask to go on speeches and on stages. What was the one or two, because you did a lot, memorable things the experiences you had came out of that book?
What I sometimes like to share, because I think a lot of people look at people like you and I and how did that happen? And I think no, but I think there's there's a bit of coincidence to it as well, and
Mhm.
especially on the keynote speaking side, because I wrote most of the book in Cape Town because
Oh, okay.
so I moved there with an ex-girlfriend and was running the company still with clients out of Cape Town. And why I'm sharing that is because when I was there, I wrote a couple of op-eds for newspapers and stuff. And then
Yeah.
suddenly I received this phone call out of the blue from somebody who wanted me to come and talk
Speak.
about
Yeah.
my work.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever thought about that. There was no
Oh,
connection between those two things. I didn't even know it existed as a career path.
wow.
And so I remember I pretty quickly said no. And
Okay.
then and
That's
and
funny.
and
I didn't know that.
yeah, no, and then they were like, but we'll obviously pay you.
Oh, that's even
And then I
better.
was
You're like,
like, yeah,
whoa. Oh,
yeah,
this is
pay me.
yeah.
Okay, tell me
Guy,
more. Tell me
yeah,
more.
that's great. That's what's fascinating is that I was the first. There were two when Can had added PR as a whole uh, category, and there were two U.S. judges, and I was picked as one. And so, and it was fabulous experience. I love being a judge. We had like God, I don't know, 2,000 cases to read and entries and whatever. But when I always like to, get if I'm going to be in Cannes, I want to give a
Yeah,
speech.
yeah,
And so I offered to give a speech, and they said no, 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 no. And then like 3 weeks said we're all full up. And then 3 weeks before the event, they called me up and said somebody dropped out. Do you want to give a speech on the main stage? And so I went, you bet. And it was the first, I believe, purpose speech ever at Cannes, 2009. And I remember, walking up and down, the promenade and giving the speech to myself because I was like so nervous. But it was wonderful because the audience, very, young, exciting copywriters and advertising folk and such,
yeah,
purpose was so new to them, really,
yeah,
doing
yeah,
it well. I mean, this wasn't
yeah,
like a shiny red object ad. It was like, really the company, like, we all love Dove and the depth of Dove and the constancy and the decades of doing the work. So, okay, so we're both pioneering in here. And so let's talk about your first point of view of purpose and brands. And how did brands, in your point of view, in 2010, 2013, 14, how were they becoming meaningful? And could you give an example of one or two that you said, really struck your fancy or you created one in your firm?
yeah. I think for me, what at that time was fascinating was that it seemed like a little bit of a magic key that I found, in the sense that I felt that, wow, you can really sort of cut through in the market. You can really differentiate your brand. And I mean, the simple premise I put in the book was actually that if you do something good for people and planet, it's good for brand and bottom line. It was a very sort of simple premise I put forward, but it's kind of how I felt at that time. It was when I looked at, and again, more or less, probably around the same time you were doing your speech in Cannes, Chipotle 2010, the year after, did the Grand Prix for Back to the Start, which had
Which
this
was great.
beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful narration about how we got farming wrong and how we need to go back to, you know, honoring the soil and rotation and all that stuff. And and so I really felt that, and that was sort of my belief at that time, and what I ran around was, this is opportunity. You guys can like run into this, like find
Hmm.
your issue,
Right.
find your fight, and people will reward you for it. Because if you in a landscape of bad food
Yeah.
can create a narrative around good food, you're gonna win. It's that
Hmm.
simple. So I probably had a quite naive view at that time, but it was different times, and I think that little sort of advantage, I think, actually did last for quite a couple of years, in fact, before it became much more mainstream.
Yeah. And then we got into like purpose washing. So we'll get there in a minute. But so I
Yeah,
returned to Cannes in 2014. when I did my five-year stint at Edelman, being global head of their business plus social purpose practice, which was a blast. I loved going around the world. And so I went to Cannes just to study. And I studied not only all the PR entries, but many of the advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And then I wrote a memo to Richard Edelman, which is like, these are the themes that are being used, but there was purpose, as we know, everywhere. And it was 14, 15, 16, 17. And then I know that you got involved, and a lot of it was really good.
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah,
it was beginning to get a little bit into like, well, it's a great creative, but there's no depth. But then you also worked with Act Responsible to set up that display. I don't know if it was an awards at Cannes, which I loved those ads because they were
yeah,
so in your face. Can you share
yeah.
with our listeners and viewers why you set that up with Act Responsible and the impact that it had at Cannes? Because Cannes is, if you haven't been for the Festival of Creativity, you got to go. It is like so
Yeah.
fun. It's crazy, but it's fun. And
Yeah, it's an interesting time because I you know I think actually as the book came out, and I've been, this is crazy, I've been to Cannes every year since I was 22. Every year, I
whoa.
never missed a year. And so I've been there when it was the early days, as you mentioned as well, where it was just a bunch of creatives coming together. There was no tech, there was barely any clients. It was just a lot of fun. There was a
Mm.
lot of drinking as well. There was a lot of inspiring work. You would
Right.
you would sit in a you'd sit in the auditorium, and I would watch 7 hours of car commercials, and it would be just such a wonderful time. And you would applaud, and you would boo, and you would.
Yeah. The best from around the
But
world. Yeah.
yeah, and I remember just as the book came out, I actually I think I wrote a critical piece in maybe the Guardian even. I think it was Guardian actually,
Mm.
and Philip Thomas, who was the CEO at the time of
Yeah.
Cannes Lions, wrote to me and he said, "Thomas, you want to come and have a chat about this?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not? I'll
Hell yeah.
be in London next week." And
Okay.
and so I tried to pitch him a Goodvertising award. He didn't bite,
Oh,
but
okay.
no, but back to ACT. So my involvement with ACT, in fact, started because I won an ACT award as
Ah.
one of the first awards I won when I
Mm.
was at a Danish agency. And many years later, I meet Hervé, the founder, and his two amazing daughters,
Hmm.
in Cannes that runs this basically nonprofit, who have for many years focused on, especially at that time, the nonprofit elements of the power of advertising, so the good
Hmm.
power of advertising. And so that sort of remit have expanded again, and now they look at brands initiatives much more broadly. But so they put up this exhibition in Cannes now for 25 odd years. It's absolutely astonishing what they've
Mm.
achieved. And so my role in that is I think very little. I try and help push that agenda as much as I can. Last year we got Cannes convinced to create a sustainability hub. We got them a couple of years also convinced to create an open house for good, because
Oh,
it's very
nice.
expensive to go
Yeah.
into the Palais. And
Yeah.
so I had this idea as a young creative. Everybody was, I couldn't afford the Palais, right? So
Right.
I thought, in the name of sustainability, it shouldn't be an exclusive party. It should be an inclusive one. So, and I'm so thankful to Cannes for opening up a couple of hours on Wednesday between 2 and 5,
Nice.
Act Responsible exhibition for everyone without a pass. So it's yeah.
Oh, lovely. I love that. So I'd love to hear just right now, before we get into the hero trap and others,
Yeah.
what is the state of purpose today? Or maybe even like, a few years ago, because I know that you see a shift, but what's the
Yeah.
state of it? And what sort of lessons like can you give to people in the ad business, young creatives or agency leaders? Because I have a point of view, but I want to hear yours first about, how to do it well, what does it look like, etc.
Yeah, I I think I think a couple of years ago, and I think it's difficult to talk about it without not sort of just touching briefly on the hero trap. Was that I felt suddenly that the space um, became quite crowded and very inauthentic in the sense that everybody
Yeah.
suddenly pits themselves as Mother Teresa or Gandhi, and and for me that was a little bit disheartening, in fact. And one of the questions sparked the writing of the second book was, in fact, that I asked myself the question: who do I trust? Who's
Mm.
authentic? Who's not
Yeah.
authentic?
Right.
And what that unlocked was, in fact, another question, which was, with all these brands around claiming to make the world healthier and more climate resilient, and who have in fact created change in my own life. And
Hmm.
and the list was very short. And it was interesting because when I wrote Goodvertising back then, it was difficult to find a
Hmm.
lot of good examples of brands. When I then wrote The Hero Trap and I started talking about transformative brands, the brands that actually create real change in my
Real
life.
change.
So they
Right.
they didn't make the brand the hero, they made me the hero. There wasn't a lot of brands around again. And that was an interesting shift for me. So I focused much more on the types of brands that focused on that sort of had a life-centric, almost like a human-centric
Hmm.
focus.
Yeah.
And that I felt sort of, at least for me, cut through a lot of that noise where you'd go into a corporate headquarters somewhere and it would say do good for people and planet. And I was like, what does that mean?
Right.
What is the guiding principle? Should I hold the door for an old lady? What's my
Hmm.
guiding principles here?
Right.
And so
Okay.
that was the reckoning at that time. And so um and in some ways it
Yeah.
was
I'd
also
love to.
no, yeah, go ahead.
No, no. Some ways you go first. So in some ways it was.
No, but in some ways it was also because I started seeing that purpose pushback and that talk about sort of anti-vogue.
Okay.
And that for
We're
me
beginning to
was
see it.
unsettling. It was
Hmm.
unsettling to have that pushback. So I felt that maybe I had done something wrong with my first book, because after all, good advertising has a moral imperative to it, good or bad.
Hmm.
And I was young, and probably that was never really the intention, pointing fingers at someone to say you're bad, I'm good. Um, and so there was a lot of sort of, yeah, there was a lot of sort of things going into that at that time. And the biggest difference between the first and the second book was, this time around I thought, I'm going to create a model, a tool,
Hmm.
because then at least I have something that people can apply in the businesses, through their leadership, whatever it might be.
Okay. So one, if you don't mind naming names, I'd
Yeah,
love you to say who do you really admire? And it could be 4 years ago, 5. I mean, I know we talked about Chipotle and they went through
yeah,
various interesting, when
yeah,
they had the deaths in the store,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then Brian Nickel came in and he really did an amazing job of going down to the depth of the company and, to your point, regenerative agriculture and incredible food, and the
mm,
company just really got through that bad situation and did
yeah,
really well. But who else? And we also talked Dove because we all love Dove. But who
absolutely.
else do you really like that you could say exemplary, long term? This is, truly meaningful to me and the world.
It's so interesting because the list is unfortunately getting shorter and shorter, and
Okay.
I think it's down to consistency, right? There's
Hmm.
very few brands that survived this decade of
Mm,
um, being, or keeping the purpose alive.
yeah.
And let me explain that, because in some ways I think what has happened is that, operating in a world of big multinationals with multiple brands and complexities, and one has to ask the question if in so many ways that business model is not just outdated, that
Mhm.
the very
Yeah.
business model that a lot of these brands are founded upon is around cheap labor, is around pushing ingredients down to the lowest possible price, bulk,
Mhm.
all this stuff. And as that happens, at the same time, what have happened over this last 10 to 15 years is that we've had brands that was built with purpose,
Mhm.
that was,
Yep.
I mean, I think in advertising land, back to the shotgun, I think we like to call them challenger brands, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There you
And
go. Mhm.
yeah, and so I think that just puts an unprecedented pressure on these big legacy brands,
Mm.
because these folks can do it right. And I think even if you look at a brand that I had in the first book, Body Shop, which for me, the story behind it, and
Oh, I loved
I
Anita. Yeah, we got to do about a tad of work with her, and when she passed, I was like, and she passed young.
yeah,
She was
but
such a leader. At the
yeah,
core, like
because
with Ben and Jerry and such.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's industry change, right?
Yeah, it did.
And in that sense, then suddenly you see a brand that doesn't stay up to date, that see others moving faster, challenging them,
Mhm.
pushing them, uh, and so I think the challenge is always between, like, there's a saying and a doing.
Mhm. Yeah,
The
the say-do
doing for a
gap,
lot
which
of, yeah,
Paul Pullman talked a lot about.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult if you're Paul Pullman and you're heading up a big multinational which have a lot of products. I mean, even Ben and Jerry's. I mean, I do mention this example in the book as well.
Yeah.
That you know, if I compare a bucket of Ben and Jerry's to my local ice cream maker down here, who gets organic fresh milk in the door every day, Ben and Jerry's is not organic. I know the cows have been out, they've had fun. The chocolate
That's
is
so
like,
fun, right.
you know,
Yeah.
it's that's a difficult reality to operate in when you're a brand like Ben and Jerry's, and then
Mhm.
that Ben and Jerry's can kind of seem like a bland commercial product with more purpose talk than actually purpose walk, right? And I think that's unfortunately the operating world that I think a lot of CMOs don't like to wake up in, and doesn't know how to navigate.
So they don't know how to. I'm glad you brought don't know how to navigate, because
Yeah,
it's interesting. You and I come from a little bit of a different. I started doing brand purpose, but I really then got into corporate purpose, because I feel that
yeah,
when you define that, it is your compass and your
yeah,
direction if you live it. And we have marvelous client, the Kerry Group, out of Ireland. And we worked with a young CEO. And basically, they said that the work we did was a journey to the center of their soul.
yeah,
So if you've got the C-suite, and the CMO should be in the C-suite, and so it's
yeah,
going to impact employees, it's going to impact, to your point, sourcing, it's going to impact consumers and such. And then to your point, the communications. What do
yeah,
you feel we need to share with CMOs today? Because I know that, they are on the hot seat. They got to sell
yeah.
more stuff. And the turnover for CMOs but there are some that truly believe in it. So I'm curious, if you were giving a conference to a group of CMOs, it's
Yeah.
hard today, especially also with AI, but what would you say to them okay, you want to find that meaning. What would you say to them?
For me, it's almost like the journey that I've been on, anyways. It's almost like I felt I found the way back to actually what makes a brand loved, in this
Great.
in the sense that when a company starts or when a brand begins
Hmm.
its early journey, they were there because they were fulfilling a need or a
Hmm.
want.
Yep.
And somehow along the way, they might have got lost. And so the framework that I use is based on basically one simple question: who can you help people become? So how can you play
Great.
a
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, transformative role in people's lives?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always challenge the CMOs or even the C-suite in general is to go back to that.
Yeah.
Because they might have gotten lost in the big nonsense of
Growth.
new competitors,
Yeah,
of technology,
and
growth.
Yep.
And
Growth. Profit.
and even if you see a company like Apple that had such a, for me at least as a young aspiring creative, that one of my second laptop was this little, it looks like a bag, right? The little blue MacBook that just stood out. Like it just didn't look like anything else you'd ever seen. And when you walk through the city of Copenhagen with a laptop like that, it said, "You're different."
Right. Yes.
You're creative.
You'll be different. Yes.
Yeah. And so obviously when a company grows from a small niche player challenging the personal computer space to a big, let's call it evil in some ways, tech company. Yeah. That how do you then navigate that? How do you make sure that you still stay on purpose? And of course it's difficult, but I really think that it needs to be back to that life-centric thing. And I think the best brands in my life, I mean, I can take my next door country, Sweden, Spotify. What's so amazing about Spotify is that it plays a transformative difference in my life, because they make me discover new music. They push me into new genres that I didn't even know that I would like. I mean, Amapiano, I didn't know I would be an Amapiano fan. Now I love it. And so by having this sort of transformational idea behind it, I could probably go to Apple Music, or I could probably, but now my whole listening story is there. My whole relationship is built up with Spotify. I don't want to let that go.
Yeah. I'd love to give a shout out to Airbnb, because their purpose is belong. And they have done such amazing things, especially in crises, in terms of opening up, whether it's a flood, a fire, et cetera, their homes and such, to house people. And so, and they constantly, push what the product provides. So I think that's a great one. Another one, which I just listened to an HBR, Harvard Business Review, global conference about AI and other things. And they had Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart, on. And he talked about, they asked about his purpose. And he said, well, when Sam Walton created this firm, it was about bringing to rural America products that people could not get, and that at a fair price.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it became save money, live better. They went into the growth thing, didn't really focus, et cetera. But during Katrina, then when everything devastated, and they had the Walmart trucks backed up, truck to truck to truck to truck. It was a big picture in the New York Times. And Lee Scott at the time said, "Why can't we be like that every day?"
Yeah.
And so they came back to their purpose. And Doug McMillon said, "You know what we do today? Live better. How the planet lives better. How people live better. How we live better with health." And he said an amazing thing, which he's such a humble, great guy. And he said, "You know who paid for this? The shareholders paid for it, because we took billions of dollars and reinvested in the company to get to the live better part. And yes, our margin decreased, but we served our people better." And I don't think, if you haven't heard him, you wouldn't believe that. But Walmart is playing such a, they're ginormous, like 200,000, 2 million employees. So I love the fact about truly mattering. I want you to talk a little bit about the Ben and Jerry situation, because you wrote an interesting article, and I grew up with them. So I knew Ben, I knew Jerry, but Jerry decided, because of the changes at Unilever, to leave. And you had a very important point of view about that.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, I obviously, even though I do critique the brand somehow in my book, I do also love the brand for what it is. I mean, again, as I said, there are two different worlds that are clashing, right? There's the world of multinationals, and then there are the challenger brands. For me, I just don't know what a multinational such as Unilever want with a Ben and Jerry's if it's not Ben and Jerry. That's
Yeah,
I
there
think
you go.
that
It's a good
was,
point. Yeah,
I just
the
don't
authenticity. They're
understand.
the
Yeah,
guys. Yeah.
I don't understand that, and I think it was the same thing we saw when L'Oreal purchased the Body Shop, but they didn't actually want the Body Shop.
Yeah.
They, and so I think there are these types of clashes that when you already have an ice cream portfolio that is quite substantial from a
Magnum
Unilever
and such. Yeah.
perspective. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you serve a group of folks that we know are very passionate about Ben and Jerry's? Again, it's almost back to my early book again, right? Here you actually figured out speaking to a certain group of people that just absolutely love these guys. I mean,
yeah.
Why risk it? Why jeopardize it? And the other point I think I made in that piece that you're referring to is that there's operating in the world of business, but having a separate foundation is just a Frankenstein from the very onset. Of course, those two worlds will not go down very well. And,
right.
I mean, when we see, for example, Patagonia, what they have done, at least they took a fundamentally different view to it, right? Because the foundation owns the business and has certain other rules to follow by. And I see that in my neck of the world as well, with a brand like Carlsberg, for example, that in some ways is also foundation owned, not to the same degree, but it's a different way. So I think they also built themselves a Frankenstein, probably because that was part of the deal when that deal was made. So it's a hot potato for Unilever to manage.
Yeah, they should let them go. I mean, they really should. I mean, I think that anyway, that's a whole nother story for another day because we loved. I mean, I've had Paul on the podcast many times, and he was such a genius, and he was so. I think one of the things I'd love to just share. I think you believe in this, and I do. Is that being humble? You want to be creative and you want to be brave. And I want to get into you made a great quote about bravery, but being humble, you're humble. And I think that, and I think also in our political situation now, that the bragging and the forcefulness needs to be counter. There's always things swing both ways. And humility is what we all need for each other to give meaning with brands and companies and such. So I want to talk about the political because I just started talking about the political situation. Interestingly, you're not in the U.S., you're in Europe, but during COVID-19, that was a shock, and then George Floyd was another shock, which the country truly over-indexed in terms of DE&I. And then we started getting over that and getting back into the normalcy of our lives, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have, a new president and such, and all of a sudden DE&I is anathema and ESG is anathema and such. So in this polarized, highly polarized situation, can brands, should they even consider being purposeful and providing meaning to people?
Absolutely. It's an interesting time, as you say. I mean, I'm spending most of my time on the other side of the pond, right, and watching U.S. politics is really a passion for me. It's kind of like watching House of Cards, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. House of Cards, one that's even worse, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like no scriptwriter could come up with such an outrageous script for what's happening. So I look at it. I suck it up like I'm in a series on Netflix. Netflix is not even interesting. Even even
You got to
Game of
watch The
Thrones.
Diplomat. You got to watch The Diplomat. I don't know if that's Hulu and Netflix, but it's great. It's very much about like today too. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy time we live in. There's two sides to the political situation. I will very much say that I feel that I'm also to blame for part of that polarization. In
You
some
are.
ways. Yeah, because
Okay, do tell.
no, but as I said, with Goodvertising and this idea about framing purpose around good or bad, or pointing fingers, or saying we do this, and there's a lot of, it's back to the story about where I grew up. I grew up on this small island, and obviously with a lot of farmers and fishermen. And what has happened during this period is that there has been a lot of finger pointing. When people point fingers at farmers and think they are climate sinners, and what does that do to a farmer who lives off nature? And suddenly you have a city boy like me pointing fingers. That's not a very great way of winning someone over. And so I think the sustainability movement in some ways have also alienated a lot of people by the rhetoric that we have had. And I regret that. And so for me, the most daunting, most bold, most audacious purpose for me is one that builds bridges. And it's tough to do that. I think we all know that in a great piece of storytelling, you got a villain, right? And you got a hero, and so it's difficult. But if one ad I often refer back to is, for example, United Colors of Benetton, and when Elvis Triscati was there.
Wonderful.
I still see a lot of that stuff. And there's this ad that I think it's from, when there was this, the war in Yugoslavia, and basically what he did was he took a picture of a dead soldier's clothing. The T-shirt was bloody, the pants, and I think it was a Bosnian soldier, and it was a very dramatic image to put up on a billboard. Grueling. But the story behind it is so amazing, because what he wanted to do was he wanted to portray humanity. He didn't want to pick a side in this war. He wanted people to understand that here's a Bosnian soldier that the father that didn't come back. And so whether you are a Muslim or Christian, or whether you're in Serbia, or whether you're in Croatia, it doesn't really matter, because we forgot that. And so I think this is where my sort of disappointment comes from in the climate movement, because we've been very good at pointing fingers at other people, saying what they shouldn't be doing, what they shouldn't be eating. And in some ways that came from a place of often privilege and affluence. And I think when you're in school and you're good at math, you don't bully the kid who's not good at math. And I think maybe that's unfortunately what I was part of in my early career, and some of the things that I regret in the type of leadership that I gave to the world.
Oh, well, that's very, I think, humble of you to say, but I think that you are sticking your neck out there. And I love the work of Toscani. I mean, I love when, the two hands together. I mean, that was really early, in your face, beautiful. And that was advertising, it was imagery, it was communications. They weren't trying to sell stuff, they were trying to sell the issue, which was beautiful.
It made the big difference was that it really made us think. It made us question our biases, and it didn't want to sell us.
It wasn't preachy.
It was
exactly. It was like 1984 for Apple. It was thinking differently, and that's truly extraordinary communication. You say, and I always like to bring up quotes from my guests. You say the only weapon is bravery. Right now for brands. What does that mean?
It goes for leaders, it goes for brands, it goes for all of us at this day and age. I feel that when we are in a fight, and we cannot ignore that. And if you're back to the CMOs as well, I don't think there's ever been a time in our industry where there's been so much change happening. AI, the social media, like everything seems to be turning upside down. And I always felt that great communication, great leadership is built on bravery. And 1984, that piece of communication demanded bravery. I remember there's this story that Steve Jobs actually had to tell his board and risk his, saying, I believe that we should run this ad during Super Bowl. I don't have any like really good arguments besides that, I believe in this, right? And so I think we need that bravery, and it's very easy to be complacent or to think that someone else somewhere is gonna do something about this. And so I always love these stories, whether it's someone insignificant or somewhere else in an organization who actually rises up to the challenge, or as again, being a European on the other side of the pond, and we see the underdog today in New York, comes above his weight. It's just absolutely amazing, and so I think we need bravery when we're faced with
maybe tyranny. Can I say that? Bravery when we're faced with tyranny. Show my political leanings.
No, but to be honest, it's hard to say that we are up against a conservatism that is selling a world that doesn't exist, a world where oil is cheaper than renewable energy doesn't exist, a world where the white man rules the world, it doesn't exist. And so, and when we're up against someone who does everything to lie, to manipulate, to go up against our democratic values, obviously we will have to fight. And what I feel disheartening is that a lot of brands don't dare to pick up that fight, because a lot of brands do. I do understand when you have a brand that serve everyone, that you might want to take more of the bridge builder approach. But if you're a brand that serve a certain someone, fight.
Yeah.
Say this is enough. And when we saw the first time around with the current US president, then it was a different matter. We saw Airbnb run ads. We saw a lot of other brands being very bold about how they viewed the world, and they stood up for the values. And a lot of those, unfortunately, have been quite silent, and that's disheartening.
Yeah, it is disheartening. I think the one thing that we see so much is that companies in the US, they haven't discarded their commitments to DE&I, and they haven't discarded their ESG, because there's so much value creation, especially in the environmental work, but they're changing how much they're talking about it.
Yeah.
And then also, if they are talking, they're talking through their employees. They're talking through their NGO partners. They're talking through their communities. So the channels right now, because you don't want to get whacked, you want to do the good work. So it will be interesting.
I don't think. In some ways, I sometimes joke that maybe Ken Lyon should award Trump as the president who's been the most interested ever in advertising, because the guy comment on a logo change, on a new product launch,
on Cracker Barrel, that was just extraordinary.
He just loved that stuff. Maybe that's the award he needs. I would rather give him that award than a Peace Award. So let's do that compromise.
Well, he knows a lot about branding, and he knows a lot about communication from a lot of his TV career. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I unfortunately, we have to wind it down. But what's next for you?
following up on what I just said in terms of the bridge building and all of that stuff, I think that's something that's very close to my heart. So that is something I'm working on, trying to understand that better and how I can better serve to fight that polarization that's going on right now, fight that misinformation. As a professional, I'm disheartened by seeing how AI is accelerating this even more, the attacks on journalism, etc. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at going into 2026, and hope that I in some way can contribute.
Yeah. What is the role of AI in purpose and purpose branding? Good role, bad role? It's going to help us be more creative.
I don't buy that. I don't think any of the technological advances that I've seen in our industry have done much for creativity. I think everything has made our craft worse. I don't buy that. I think AI, if it wants a purpose, don't tech wash it. I see so much tech washing from ChatGPT and others where they pretend like they're putting the humans behind the steering wheel. We know that's not true. So stop telling that narrative. Be honest about it. Let's get back to AI being a tool, and let's be brave enough to understand that we can take the lead. Hollywood scriptwriters took the lead on AI and set a boundary. As an industry and as an advertising industry, it doesn't seem like we like any types of boundaries. We don't like any type of legislation. Right. And that, unfortunately, I think hurts my colleagues. I never came back from a Cannes this year where so many of my peers are afraid of losing their jobs. And for me, that's absolutely disheartening.
It is disheartening.
So we're reliant on our people.
Yeah, totally. I always love to give the last word to my guest. So is there anything you want to add or accentuate that you've said, or something new?
I wish that, 2026, let's take the opportunity to be brave together. I think that's probably just going to be the closer remarks. We need it, and I think we need each other as a community. And Carol, I've always been looking up to your work and your leadership, and I'm really thankful for having this conversation with me today. And I think all of us need to stick more together and fight together in 2026.
I love that. That's a great conclusion, but to be continued, because we do need to be a stronger community. And when you take this work and you make it meaningful and you empower people, whether they're the recipient of the advertising or the employees in the companies and such, many stakeholders. And so kudos to your great work and your bravery. And we will continue this in the future. So thanks so much, Thomas Kolster, for joining me on Purpose 360. It's been a joy.